Hi, welcome to Studio Stillwater. My name is Michelle Charles.
And I'm Chris Peters.
And we are here today talking to former Stillwater Mayor John Bartley and Stillwater News Press Managing Editor Beau Simmons about the municipal election.
Exciting stuff.
It is surprisingly exciting. Yeah. It is surprisingly exciting, though, this year, isn't it, guys?
From the standpoint that we got an election.
There's actual campaigning going on.
There were multiple candidates.
Yes.
That's fun for us, yeah.
Multiple candidates is an understatement. Yeah, there's no doubt that there is a lot of interest in not only municipal elections, but school board too. So we can, I think there are a lot of parallels in probably some of the whys. If you just look at the number of people that volunteered to run. Mm-hmm. And I think you made a great point of we actually had campaigning in an election this time because we've gone 3 years, at least 2 years of city council.
Yeah, if you're talking about council, Wedlake was opposed a couple years ago.
Oh, that was only I think that was 2019 with Slade.
Yeah.
Right,
okay.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay, so two years. And the one before that, I think we kind of popped back and forth. Right?
Yeah.
A year, no, two candidates.
A handful of appointments, a handful unopposed.
Yeah. And so,
right.
But yeah, there's no doubt that 2021 election with 7 people that filed, 5 that actually campaigned is marketable, market increase in activity and desire to want to participate. And I think that's outstanding.
Now, why do you think that is? What do you think prompted that level of interest?
Well, it probably... Well, I haven't talked to all of them, but I'm willing to bet the reasons were different for all of them to some extent. But I think probably the common threads, and if you look back at least Stillwater's history, and I think it plays out probably most places, is when people are satisfied, when people are, hey, things are fine.
Complacency.
It leads to complacency.
Yeah.
Or it either complacency or, hey, things are good. They don't need me.
Gotcha.
One of those kind of approaches. I think that's where it leads to the no one else is filing or only one person filing. And I think the massive increase in numbers of filing has to point back to dissatisfaction at some point, or at least for some of the candidates. I don't think that's a blanket statement at all.
Right.
Especially this year when there was not an incumbent. And True. I think that factor is important because running against an incumbent, regardless of who the incumbent is, carries almost an overwhelming sense of feeling of, oh my gosh, I'm running against the incumbent. Mm-hmm. Even if the incumbent is why you chose to run, there is still a feeling of an uphill battle. And so with no incumbent, wide open field, I'm not going to step on anybody's toes. There's no one that's got an advantage. I think that broadened the scope of people that probably signed up.
Well, and I do think that open seat is a big factor because I've talked to other candidates before who, they seem to feel there are people who will feel free to step into the arena when they see an open seat because you're right. Challenging an incumbent and kind of inherently gives a sense that you're somehow dissatisfied with their performance. It's in some sense
Agreed.
Maybe an indictment of what you're seeing them doing. I mean, and maybe not that strong a word, but there's some level of dissatisfaction, right? So I think when there's an open seat, more people feel like they should, that they have the people who might not have challenged the incumbent feel like they will throw their hat in the ring.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
I think we generally had more scrutiny on our local politics, more interest, and that leads to more discussion. I know every time we had a story focused on, the mask mandates, whatever else, but anything had to do with the pandemic.
Got lots of comments on those.
A lot of people paying attention. And and we're going to challenge those people. It's sort of the thing like, oh, you think you can do better, try it out. And So plenty of people said, yeah, we'll try it out.
And we'll see what happens. And I tell you what, if you probably the closest parallel, at least in the last 15 years, as far as the numbers go, would be the 2010 city council race.
Okay.
And the reason I have memory of that is that was me. And that was back before the charter changed. So we had 2 seats that were up for election. And in one seat, 4 people filed, no incumbent. And in the other seat, 3 people filed, no incumbent. And so, that was a total of 7 between 2 seats. This year we had a total of 7, 1 seat. But that was probably the closest. And I think it parallels back to what you were saying, Beau. If you think about Stillwater in 2008, 9, 10, 11, 12, there was a lot of scrutiny on city council. And there was a lot of somewhere between dissatisfaction to confusion to I don't like what's going on or, hey, we want to change kind of a mindset. The interesting thing was a lot of people were saying they wanted change, but there were a lot of different changes that people wanted.
Mm-hmm. Right. Everybody's change isn't the same, is it?
That's not a one-size-fits-all word.
Yeah, I can see that.
Does now feel a little bit similar to then? I mean, because so back then you had, Block 34, for example, was still a conversation.
It wasn't even a conversation yet in 2010.
That started in 12, right? Yeah.
Okay, so right before then.
Yep, it was right before then. Yes, but for completely different reasons would be how I would answer that.
Okay.
In that, I think back in 2009 and 10, there was this what is going on kind of feeling with city government here in Stillwater, but it wasn't caused by the external effects of a pandemic.
Yeah.
It wasn't caused by the economic impacts that came along with it. It was other issues. And
but we were coming out of the recession
no doubt about that
period because it hit Oklahoma a little bit later. If it hit the rest of the country in like 2008, 2009, we had, the big recession, the housing bubble, the whole thing. Not that Oklahoma really got hit by that as much.
It wasn't as deep,
but it was a struggle.
We cut it was in December of 2009. And then I filed to run for that city council seat in, I think it was February is when you filed then. It was real tight between filing and the elections. That's when the city staff, that was the first time you heard the words cut to core services only really being discussed.
Yeah.
That when that phrase kind of became mainstream, and they really had to at that point. Because of the recession and a deep drop in sales tax and some other problems that were hitting, and so there was an economic impact. No doubt about that.
Right.
I think this past year though, everybody's all felt now how those local decisions. Everybody has now felt that like directly versus a decision higher up in levels of government. This was one that was like whether you're for it or against it had a clear impact.
I tell you what, the some of the local decisions made, and hey, let's just put the tail on the donkey right where it is let's talk mask mandate.
Sure.
And it's one of those, to me, that is a perfect example of why I love that our city council elections are nonpartisan.
Sure.
That I used to use the phrase, a pothole doesn't care if you're a Republican or Democrat, it just wants to get filled.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And, mask mandate, there was no reason for masks to become politicized, but they were. And city council didn't take it as a political statement. They took it as a scientific, here's what the experts are saying should be done.
A public health issue.
Yes, not a politics issue.
Like the pothole, this virus doesn't care about our feelings.
It does, or our political affiliations.
It doesn't.
So we sure got feelings about them.
We do.
It's just not mutual. So yeah, it really was. The mask mandates really it hit people. You can talk recycling, you can talk water rates, you can talk those things, and they are impacting everyone that is in the city limits and is utilizing those services. but people don't think that way. We can talk roads and how much we put into the budget for road maintenance, but most people don't think that way. Mm-hmm. You make someone change their appearance, and boom, it's going to hit at a different emotional level. And I think one of the probably the craziest things that I learned while on council, I would sometimes forget that people will put an emotional attachment on something, and I'd sit back and go, why is there an emotional attachment to that? Some things are obvious. Hey, you closed my road and it's the first week of school. I get it. Water lines break and I can't take. I get that. When we switched from you have your own trash can to the poly carts we have now,
I forgot about that.
And this was before recycling. So this was, you can't have that green trash can that you've had for forever.
Yeah.
Regardless of its size, you are going to use one of these blue ones. Wow.
But
people really love their trash cans.
Could you imagine someone running on the trash can caucus? And that's their single issue.
Not even close.
As a symbol of government overreach, though, I could see it now.
Right. Now, yes. Because it's one of those, we may have thought
right.
that the Tea Party in 2008 to 2011 was I was about to use a bad word, but I was saying extreme group. Mm-hmm. And we thought that the words chosen and the attitudes expressed were really out there or really direct and really not respectful a lot of times. Little do we know that was just a foreshadow of how entirely too many people try and discuss politics now and positions they take now. I mean, I never thought I'd wish for the politeness of the Tea Party, but that's kind of where I see where we're at.
I kind of wanted to touch on that and expand on that a little bit. When you get on city council, I mean, and as someone who's spent time on there, what are some of the challenges that you face when you're sitting up there on that horseshoe and you're the person getting those emails and having to make those decisions? What is that like? I found it overall rewarding. Notice I didn't say fun all the time. Right. There's a difference, right?
But I found it rewarding. I tried to take the approach when an issue came up that it doesn't matter what the issue was, it doesn't matter how many issues were on the agenda, it doesn't matter where it was on the agenda. I had to be on my A game 100%, spot on, knowing what was going on, having thought through it, having researched, having been there on every single topic. Because even if we only had 10 people in the audience and they were there for 10 different items, and if your item was number 1, you didn't care about items 9 through 10. Well, item 1 was yours. And the person that was number 7, they could have cared less about the rest of it, but number 7 was theirs.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Well, when you're on city council and you're making those decisions, you've got to be on your A game for 1 through 10, because you've got to be responsive to every single item that's up there. Now, as I say that, yes, there are some things that take less effort than others to figure out where the right answer is. But there are no off plays. There are no timeouts that you can take and redo, really. And so I always took the approach of, I owe it to the people that this impacts, even if I don't know them, even if they haven't communicated. I owe it to the citizens that I've got to be game on for every single item. And that can be exhausting. I mean, it truly can be when you're trying to be on, let me use the phrase on stage, and I don't mean that from an acting standpoint.
But you have to be on.
You have to be on. That's a better way to say it. All the time, not only through the meeting, but in the prep for it. And then when you got to those items that were emotional, and even if not emotional in the, there were items that were emotional, no doubt. But there were also just some very intricate you knew had very big impacts on people. And those could become even harder to deal with because all too often you've got competing interests, and the competing interests both sides have value, and both sides have valid reasons for why that direction has merit to it. And so trying to boil down complex questions into the binary yes or no is very difficult and unfair. And I think that's part of our bigger picture problem is we've lost nuance. We've lost the ability to talk about the nuance of things on too many topics, which leads us back to the SportsCenter highlight mindset and the 12-word crawl across the bottom of the screen to try and get a whole story across.
Right.
And rely on the headline as opposed to the
actually
actual
reading the story.
Every single time on one of the news press's comments, I'm like, I know they did not even click.
Yeah, you can tell they just didn't even read the story because what they're complaining about or what they're upset about or even what they like sometimes, actually, if you read the story, it's so much more nuanced. Yeah.
How different do you think that is from 10 years ago? Like they're talking about now getting feedback in almost real time. I'm sure you got your share of emails, calls, things like that.
I got my share of emails, and I was kind of on the front end of Twitter, and it's one of those, the way I mark social media, and especially Twitter, is there was pre-President Obama Twitter, then Obama made it mainstream, and then again in like 2015, 16, the next president,
right,
President
made
Trump,
it even more mainstream.
Made it even more mainstream.
Yeah.
And so I was right there in the Obama's made it mainstream, but not everyone's grandpa had it.
And Trump made it news.
Trump used it in a completely different way.
Right.
That now, unfortunately, has become, to too many people, an accepted manner of governance through social media. I don't believe that. I don't think that's the right method to go. But I love the availability of those tools to be able to share, but not to be the sole source of policy announcements.
Right.
There's got to be better ways. But we were early on in the social media realm when I was on council, and we were just learning how to potentially use it and how it was used to us, against us, for us, those kind of things. I think now the way that elected officials and city officials have to deal with social media in the real time that you brought up is, there's just an extra pressure there.
Right. It's now the thickness of one's skin also becomes another attribute. Right?
It's one of those you can talk to elected officials. We can talk to Calvin Anthony, former mayor. You could talk to former mayor. Several former mayors. You can talk to all of them, and they will all say you got to have thick skin. You're going to make people mad. And I'm talking about like in the 70s,
right.
And I bet if we could go back farther, we'd even get to, you had to be careful what you say on the party line on the phone. Right. So it's not a new issue.
Right.
It's just even more out there, and it's even more prevalent, and more people are going to see someone yelling at you now than before.
The barrier to entry is lower.
Right. And there used to be I'm sure there were some people who got some really nasty telegraphs at some point, But now you get these public call-outs on social media where they're kind of almost waiting for you to engage. It is almost like a gunfight or something. Like they're challenging you to step out in the street and take them on or prove them wrong. So it is a whole different dynamic now.
But on the flip side now, what is all the current campaigning people, the majority of their efforts are now on social media.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
And so on the flip side, now you can have city council candidates doing live chats and just and especially during a pandemic, being able to connect actually more with people. And it's now kind of who can play that game better and who has those skills.
Well, and that's a great point, Chris. I mean, having the ability, using it to form connections within the community and with the residents, with your potential voters, I think that's a huge advantage. It's like anything else. It could be used for good or for evil, right?
Well, that's what I was going to say. Is bottom line, social media is a tool. And it's a tool that you can use in multiple ways and for multiple purposes. And how you determine to use that tool is going to determine what the impact is. And it's one of those, if you want to use that tool as a weapon, it's very easy to use as a weapon.
Destructive.
If you want to use it in a relationship building, in a connection viewpoint, and for those purposes, it is a beautiful tool for that also. And just the curation of either followers or likes or whichever platform we're on to the certain term is just, I mean, it's hey, that's what communication directors are for. And if you can afford something like that. If not, then we're talking city council races. It's what can you and your buddy, how can you guys work this the best way?
Sure.
But to me, and when we're talking specific campaign and social media, of all the campaigning stuff, and me and a couple friends had this conversation a week or so ago, of all those campaigning tools and all those activities that you've got to do, you're supposed to, these are the rules of how you campaign. The activity that I hated the most and am very glad is going away. And if we can thank COVID for anything, we may be able to thank them for this: knocking on doors.
Door knocking used to be kind of the key, didn't it?
Well, it
or that's
was
what they
the
said.
social media of the thing. I mean, that was the social media of the time, and not everyone could afford newspaper ads, TV commercials, radio time, and so where was the only way to have someone know what your face was?
Pound the pavement.
Knocking on doors.
Right.
And if you flip it around and go, okay, what is today's society like? What are people's expectations of their home, their time, their attention? Most people don't like their door getting knocked on unless they're invited, if they're expecting someone. Now, that's a very broad statement, but I saw 3 heads nod when I said it.
Millennials.
And so there's
Millennials. And I'm not a millennial, and you're not a millennial, but
I'm Gen
draw the
X.
shades.
I'm Gen X.
Turn the lights off, draw the shades.
So it's people don't want random people knocking on the door. You're interrupting me. I was doing something else. Blah 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 blah.
Sure.
It's the same. That's where this again. You flip it around to social media. I'm going to go find that content on social media when I want to go find it. As the consumer, as the voter, if you want to leave something on my door, hey, more power to you. But knocking and interrupting, I didn't like doing it because I felt like I was interrupting, and I did. If I don't like something myself, I don't like doing that to others.
yeah.
Sure.
I briefly helped Trish Ranson, not this time, her first time, volunteer with somebody to go knock on some doors. And we were knocking in Westwood. So, not a bad neighborhood to walk around in. Plenty of trees. And it doesn't seem very efficient because we knocked on Bob Darcy's door. And then he just invited us in, and we were,
It was all over.
yeah, it was like, well, I guess we're not going to check off on our little mobile app here all the people because we just spent 30 minutes with one person, which is great, but probably not worth the effort and the time because, well, honestly, we never even talked about him voting for Trish.
Oh,
Put it
wow.
that way.
Well, yes, Dr. Darcy is. But you know what? I bet it was a great 30 minutes. I bet it was a very interesting 30 minutes.
Oh, I mean, it was fantastic. And
Yeah,
I mean,
it's a great one to talk to.
If we're trying to serve Trish's needs of
Right.
like getting just face-to-face impressions, our 2 hours doing that wasn't very
I
efficient.
mean, that's the thing. I mean, social media can be very personal. I mean, it truly can be very personal. It feels personal, especially when something's being done to you on it. But it's not the face-to-face connection. And I guess that was the deal, right? You just didn't have the ability to foster those personal connections with people otherwise. And now maybe you can a little better with social media, which actually kind of brings me to a question that I had for you. What do you think it takes to win an election in Stillwater? What do voters in Stillwater seem to respond to?
Well, my smart aleck answer is one more vote than the other person.
Sure, that's always good.
In a general sense, I do wonder, do you think you're still policy versus policy, or is it about getting your people to the polls?
Right.
Creating a kind of base that
it rolls back to getting people out.
Yeah.
I mean, ultimately, it is a relationship thing. There's an old saying, and I believe it. I mean, it's a great rule of thumb. Doesn't mean that there aren't exceptions, but it's a great rule of thumb. People vote for people, not for policies. And so if you come out and you laundry list what you think and what you want to do, and that's all you say, if you don't have a story behind that, if you don't connect, if you don't tie those policies or those positions to that person and why that person should vote for you, then the policy is not going to get you there. I mean, it's too easy to go, oh, well, it's 14 degrees outside and we've got 5 inches of snow on the ground and not go vote. Or I got busy at work and forgot. But if you can create that personal connection and that either I really want this person to win, or gosh, I feel like I have a duty to go vote, then it makes it real hard to rely just on policy. I think in Stillwater, I've used the phrase when I've talked to candidates, and it's what I tried to do each time. I think people in Stillwater, they want to see activity. They want to see effort. They want to see out there working. They want to hear the noise, but they don't want the fight. They don't want name calling. They don't want bashing. They don't want the attack. Doesn't seem to resonate well with Stillwater voters. Now, again, I'm not talking every Stillwater voter. I'm talking about one more than the other person.
Right.
And
Enough Stillwater voters.
Enough Stillwater voters. Okay. And so I think Stillwater voters, they want to see you working for it, but that doesn't mean you're attacking the other person. And where, or the why behind that, I don't have a clue. But if you look at our races over the last 15 to 20 years, that is how it has shaken out, is the people that have either gone dirty or have gone attacking, even when on paper or conventional wisdom of the, they've got all this backing and they've got the right initial by their name. It hasn't played out very, very well for the person on the attacking side. And so I know that when I talk with people, I tell them, one, doesn't matter, don't attack. But even if that's your mindset, don't attack because it's not going to work. So I think to win elections in Stillwater, you've got to have the policy. You've got to have the substance. You got to have something that you stand for that does resonate. I mean, there's got to be something real there. It's more than a popularity contest. I mean, we're not talking junior high. With that said, you can have the most beautiful policies in the world, but until you cause someone to go, I need to, I want to be a part of making sure this happens, you're fighting an uphill battle.
You know, I've noticed sometimes people seem to get mobilized to run based on an issue that has just struck them, right? Whether it's, we're going to fix the streets, whether there was a big high density apartment complex that's going to be built right by your house and you suddenly realize, hey, zoning's important. and you get mobilized, I mean, I always used to laugh about, you guys sitting there and watching the people file into the room all wearing matching t-shirts. And I still tell people, if you want to get their attention, just get a bunch of matching t-shirts and about 20 of you march into the city council room and sit together. It's a movement. Now you're a movement.
Well, I could say say the mask mandate is your issue, right? This still, I don't know, it kind of strikes me as odd. If that's your issue, why is there a need to get everybody on board? The Amish aren't trying to take out the power grid. Okay, they're living their lives.
We're allowed to have phones.
So say that is, you can. I don't think you can push a single issue, but I do think it mobilizes folks, like you said. Yeah.
You were talking about the person versus the policy. I mean, I think because of that, sometimes people get mobilized around a singular issue, and that's maybe the one thing that they're really, really passionate about. And my sense is always that they don't necessarily realize all the other stuff they're going to have to deal with when they get on there. And so at some point, once that issue is taken care of, whether it's resolved the way you want it to be or not, once that's put to bed, this person is still going to be making decisions that affect your life. So you have to feel good about that person and feel like they have good judgment generally and like you can trust them. At least that's my perspective.
I absolutely agree with you. I think that is a very sophisticated way to look at it.
Thank you.
I think there are several people that probably don't have quite that sophisticated a view of things. I think, we've had several single issue candidates run in the last 15 years. Some have been successful, some have not in getting elected. And I think that when you put yourself out there as this is my thing, I think that tends to narrow your supporters. Now, those that are 100% with you are 100% with you. Those that are going, okay, I get what you're saying, but that's not my thing. I may agree with you, but that's not my thing. That doesn't mean they're going to jump in your camp. And they're just as likely to be on someone else's side, even though they're going, okay, yeah, I agree with him on this one, but I agree with her on 5 other things.
And that can outweigh it.
Absolutely.
That makes sense. Consistently when I've talked to people who got on city council too, there's always the, it's kind of a cliche that drinking through a fire hose, but just the idea that you don't even know what you don't know until you get on there. And then all of a sudden you're having to absorb these massive amounts of information and you see exactly how the municipal sausage is made, I guess. I'm using so many cliches in turns of phrase right now. But anyway, but you know what I mean? It's like you get to see the inner workings and, things you didn't realize before. How much of a shock is that?
It's a pretty big shock. And on top of you having to learn, and most people having to learn from square one, even if you know a whole lot about building and development, that doesn't mean you know anything about the budget process or you know anything about a trust authority or how utilities really work. So you may have knowledge in one area, but you're sitting at 0 in so many others. So not only starting at the beginning, you're also starting in the middle of the process. Doesn't matter what we're talking about, the city is always churning. That budget is always churning. We're always looking at what's happening. And so and budget's a beautiful example of this. We have our elections in late winter, early spring. And within 2 months of you being on council, you're having to vote to approve the next year's budget. My first vote on a budget, I was still trying to figure out, does that mean thousands or millions, in those columns? And so that first, I remember I voted on that first budget just going, okay.
I think Stillwater is really lucky the defund the police movement never made it to city council's door.
I would
can
agree.
imagine the other nightmare that would have been.
That would have been tough, right? Because whoever came up with that phrase for what it really means needs to get a dictionary.
Oh, yeah. Worst
Horrible.
Marketing ever, right? Worst naming.
Just But it's one of those, back on what you're talking about on the learning and the fire hose, it is a whole lot to learn, and it's such a diverse set of topics to learn. Everything from finance to technical to, how do you read a building code, and why would you want to then jumping over and trying to get the history of things and going, okay, wait, the city owns the hospital? Wait, and so just trying to put all these pieces into place. And then once you get the facts, then you've got to start figuring out the history and the people and the who has made who mad and why has this not worked type of thing. When you ask what was it like to be on the horseshoe, I'm going to twist that question just a touch. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be, what was one thing you thought you were able to do or how to do it that, no, it doesn't work that way? And my answer for that is I ran in 2010 and I just banged the drum of bring a business mindset to government. Okay. Fiscal responsibility, and let's make smart decisions, and let's bring the business mindset to government. And I actually, a couple years ago, when I was going through stuff, found when you interviewed me, Michelle, as a candidate.
Okay.
And I thought, what kind of a moron is this guy? With some of my answers.
He didn't know anything.
I didn't know anything. And the biggest light bulb I probably had as on council and as mayor was that beautiful sounding cliche term, bring business to government, is not something you can just pick up and set down on government. And there are legal reasons why. I mean, just fundamental, constitutional, state law, state constitution, U.S. Constitution reasons why the concept of business does not just shoehorn into how government works. Now, with that said, that doesn't mean government can't work better. But you cannot say, I've run my company for 25 years and made a profit every year, and I know how to do all this stuff. Here's how we're going to do it in government. Yeah, that doesn't work. It just doesn't work.
Well, and I mean, honestly, government doesn't exist to turn a profit. It exists to provide services that individuals cannot provide for themselves, which is a very different sort of enterprise, isn't it?
It really is. It really is. And that raises an interesting question of what is the role of government?
Absolutely.
Especially the local municipal. What is its role?
Sure.
And I think that when you cut through a lot of the noise, and again, let's roll it back just to this last election. When you cut through some of that noise, that was kind of one of the questions that was being thrown around, maybe not in those exact words, of, what do we want from our government? What do we need from our government? What should our government be providing? And they never really got to the, and how is it going to get paid for part of that question. But that, and again, we can talk mask mandate. What is our government supposed to be doing? That is a question that should be asked at much deeper and fundamental levels, in much more often and in much larger groups, to find out what is it that the people of Stillwater, because once again, no offense to the people of Enid or Woodward or Oklahoma City or Tulsa, if I'm on city council in Stillwater, it doesn't matter what the people of Tulsa want their government to be doing. It's what do the people of Stillwater want our government to be doing. And I think that our local government has done a good job of trying. I mean, we kick out these things. Just, I'm a big fan of the drip, drip, drip method. You can't just go up and bang someone over the head and all of a sudden, oh, you're right, I believe you. Sometimes it takes drip, 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 drip of information, of thought, and then some people go, okay, I get it. The city, and we have over time have used different ways of doing this. The current one, and I'm thinking of a sign right at Babcock Park that they have up, the sign says it's your tax dollar, or it's your tax money. How would you spend it? Okay. That's another way of saying what we said in 2013 when we put out this big bubble chart, and we just had circles that represented, they were according to the size, the dollar amount of, and there's a big circle with a police car in it, and a big circle with a fire truck, and a big circle with electric. And so both on revenue and on expense side. And we said, here's what it is now. What do people want to do with the size of these circles? It's another way of saying they're your tax dollars. What do you want to do with them?
So did you feel like that was effective? What kind of response did you get?
Marginally effective. I mean, the people that actually interacted with it, I think they got a better feel for some understanding. I think it was in 2016, 17, I was off council. They actually had, they put up, and it was on their website, on the city's website, where you could go to their website and they had a page that functioned as like an Excel spreadsheet that, I mean, it's very controlled, but it was, here's the revenue. Here are all the big bubbles. You put the money where you want it to go. Again, another tool just like this sign. And so again, now you go to the city's website and it's the same kind of thing. But again, drip, 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 drip.
Thanks for listening to part 1 of our interview with former Stillwater Mayor John Bartley and News Press Managing Editor Beau Simmons. Up next in part 2.
So we're sitting there in that awkward teenager kind of moment of we're too big to be small town, but we're not big enough to be big town, and we got to deal with the bad side of both.
I feel like someone could take that soundbite and then make the argument for a ward system in Stillwater. I mean, you think there are pros and cons for a ward system?
That comes up periodically, doesn't it? Do you think there would be advantages? I mean...
Oh, I'm kind of torn on the ward system, and I was torn when I was on council.
Our mission at Studio Stillwater is to elevate local voices to tell local stories. You can get in touch with us via email, studiostillwaterok@gmail.com, or slide into our DMs on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. You can also send us a voice message by going to anchor.fm/Studio Stillwater. Just hit the Add Message button to record right from your phone or computer. We would love to feature your voice in a future episode. Finally, check out the show notes. There you will find links to everything we discussed on the show. Thanks again for joining us. Until next time.